The pressure is getting even higher for Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Nearly 100 mayors in his state penned a letter to leaders expressing concerns over the state's fiscal policy amid the ongoing fraud scandal. Part of the letter reads, fraud, unchecked spending, and inconsistent fiscal management in St. Paul have trickled down to our cities. Our state owes it to our citizens to practice responsible fiscal management and to stop taxing our families, seniors, and businesses out of Minnesota. Let's bring in now Andrew Mullen, the mayor of Wayzata, Minnesota. He is one of the mayors who signed onto this letter. Sir, thank you for joining us on this Christmas Eve. We greatly appreciate your time. In your words,
yes.
Why did you sign onto this letter? Why is it so important?
Sure. Well, good morning and Merry Christmas to you in studio and to all your viewers. You know, Minnesotans this season are waking up to coals in their stockings thanks to their government and a Grinch who stole Christmas, which is this egregious fraud. You know, many mayors signed onto this letter, including me. You know, in addition to the fraud, I have profound concerns about the macro level economy of Minnesota and how we're going to pay to clean up this mess and go forward. And you know, if you're a mayor, you're on the front lines, right? You're out there providing the basic services of police, fire, water, streets. And with all of this egregious fraud and overspending, what's left over to trickle down to invest in our local communities? Our taxpayers are going to make up the difference in the form of property taxes locally. And that's the primary reason why I signed on. We have to get them to pay attention, not to just the fraud, but what's the macro level path forward to fix it and to take a step out of this hole.
Yeah, and some of the points that are made here is that really you're looking at like the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce report and some of the challenges that the state is facing, where the state is ranking compared to all of the other states all across the nation, and also making the argument that, you know, all of your cities are facing slowed business investment, rising costs. There are tax issues at play here as well. I mean, what do you want to say to your state government? What changes would you like to see?
Well, sure. If you note that Minnesota Commerce report, it's a rolling 5-year report, and we in Minnesota slipped from the middle to top to the bottom third to the bottom fifth. GDP growth 33rd out of 50, job growth 39 out of 50, labor force growth 40 out of 50, median household income 46 out of 50. All across a backdrop of one of the highest overall tax rates in the country. The second highest, actually, and the 6th highest income. And so when you look at how are we going to pay for all this, we have to start talking about how do we provide the inputs to the outputs, meaning a robust economy puts pay into the system that allows us to invest in our infrastructure and where appropriate social services and a safety net. But we've come from an $18 billion surplus in this biennium, looking forward 2 years to a $2 to $3 billion deficit. Someone's going to have to pay for that. And what I think about for our local folks is what are the trade-offs that are going to be made in the investments in infrastructure, in police and fire, in water, and things that are basic, right? And so it's not just the fraud, it's now how do we clean it up?
Yeah, the shift in that from a surplus to a deficit is worth noting as well. But I don't want to leave this fraud story out of what we're talking about because it is such an enormous scandal. And the amounts that we're talking about in the billions. Here is your governor. We're going to listen real quick, and then I want to get your response. Here's Governor Walz.
Sure. What we found is these are poorly written, and it left openings, and the goal was to get the money out. We'll fix that. But yeah, I'll take accountability for it. But what you're seeing here is you're seeing a weaponization. We'll continue to fix it. They're going to continue to come up with numbers that don't have it there, and it's sensationalized. I don't expect anything different from this administration.
So he makes an argument that the numbers are sensationalized, not as big as what they seem, but this is pretty big, into the billions. I mean, I don't know if his argument is, oh, it's merely millions, but your thoughts?
Well, I don't look at this as a partisan issue. It's really about how are we spending our neighbors' money. And from my chair, there has to be transparency and accountability. Talks about taking responsibility, but I don't hear anything about what we're going to do to fix it. It is what it is. We need to hold those accountables that committed this fraud, but then we got to look to how are we going to change our policies and our macro level environment to crawl out of this hole. And that's what I don't hear from the governor.
Mayor Andrew Mullen, thank you so much for joining us. Merry Christmas to you and all the people of Wayzata and Minnesota, I suppose. Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
So nearly 100 Minnesota mayors expressing deep concern over the shocking fraud in their state that we're still trying to get to the bottom of. In a letter to Governor Tim Walz, who's running for re-election, they write, quote, fraud, unchecked spending, and inconsistent fiscal management in St. Paul have trickled down to our cities, reducing our capacity to plan responsibly, maintain infrastructure, hire and retain employees, and sustain core services without overburdening local taxpayers. The Trump administration freezing $5.5 million in small business loans to Minnesota has the entire fraud scandal costing taxpayers up to $9 billion, and much of that money has left the country. Cross Lake, Minnesota Mayor Jimmy Purist spearheaded the letter. He joins us now, along with fellow signer, South St. Paul Mayor Jimmy Francis. Let's start with you, Mayor Purist. Tell me what prompted you to take action and marshal the other mayors.
You know, this originally started with 8 local mayors of the Brainerd Lakes area seeing the policies coming out of the Capitol that are hurting our industry. We're very focused on tourism, and it's hard for businesses to retain employees and have some money coming in. So we decided to pen a letter. After I had posted it, mayors from across the state of Minnesota have said, this is great. How can I sign on? And so ever since then, I have championed and spearheaded this letter, and we have over 100 mayors now that are on this letter, and it's only continuing to grow.
Mayor Francis, how has your community been hurt?
Well, thanks for having us on and talking about this. My community is reaching out to me because they're not getting answers from DHS, from other legislators, and they're scared. There's so much unknown for what those programs are. And, you know, as a mayor, we are the front line. We try to help them. And so we've been taking them to our county officials to try to help them at least just get answers to their questions, because there's so much unknown and everything just stopped, which, you know, is part of that process. But there's so much no communication that's happened that those that are receiving those benefits are really scared and, you know, frightened of what's next because they don't know.
Medicaid's been raided, and also programs like Feeding Our Future. You're talking about $300 million gone. House stabilization, $302 million gone over 4 years. Autism treatment, which is basically just despicable, taking money set aside for kids with autism and giving it to parents with kids without autism, which is nuts, $192 million, and $6 million in encouraging leaders, nonprofits. So that's generally, so all this money's gone. When did you become aware of this, Jackson?
You know, I would say there was talk at the beginning of this current year, but within the last 3 months, this has really gone downhill. And Brian, if we do the quick math, $9 billion in fraud divided by 5.79 million Minnesotans comes out to roughly be $1,500 a person that each Minnesotan, each hardworking Minnesotan has had stolen from them from the Walz administration and the policies coming out of St. Paul.
Do you believe the Attorney General knew nothing about this, Mayor Francis? Do you believe the governor knew nothing about this?
Look, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm a Minnesotan, and I'm frustrated with how it had happened, as well as the communication that's happened. So, really, our mayors are joining together not to point fingers and blame, but we're here to help solve the problem. That's what we do. That's what city councils do. That's what mayors do. We solve problems. We don't get to pass the buck off to somebody else. Right. And when fraud or anything bad happens in our community, you know, people lose their jobs and people get put on performance improvement plans. We don't see any of that. And we're expected to do that when things come with our state funds. They come with strings and they come with audits. And so, again, we're frustrated. We feel like we're put in a position that they're not put in, and they get a free pass, but we just have to struggle. And our communities are struggling. They're trying to make the ends meet at home. And we hear it.
I know it's nice to be nice, but you also have to get to the bottom of it, which means you're going to have to find out who's responsible, which means ultimately you have to point fingers. I'd like to find out if that money went to luxury real estate because someone bought it, luxury vacations, luxury vehicles, stacks of cash that might have left the country. You're talking about over 80 people have been indicted, many of which are convicted, and Jackson, many of them from the Somali community. There's a sense that if you accuse them of corruption, you be called a racist. Have you heard that?
I haven't heard that personally, but yes, I think it was hard to talk about Somalis or for the Democrats to talk about Somalis, but it doesn't matter if you're Somali, if you're African American, if you're white. Fraud is fraud. And if you're stealing fraud, you should be held accountable.
And who do you think should be holding them accountable? The mayors can only do so much. We have the Treasury doing an investigation. Go ahead.
I fully agree. I think the feds need to come in and do a full audit of the Minnesota books.
Right. And you notice in the 100 mayors, I don't know who's a Republican and who's a Democrat. I just saw 100 mayors because it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. We're all trying to advocate for our communities.
Absolutely. You deserve better. Absolutely. Guys, thanks so much.
Trust is the main thing.
Absolutely. And find out who's doing this and who benefited.
Brandon Gill. It's so lovely to see you tonight, Congressman. Thank you for joining us. I want to tell everybody the Walz Act, WALZ, is an acronym, Welfare Abuse and Laundering Zillions Act, by your colleague, Marionette Miller Meeks. It's not meant to be funny. It's meant to get to the bottom of what could be a roiling $9 billion scandal. Tell the viewers quickly what happened, what's at stake, and what you in Congress can actually do about it on behalf of the taxpayers.
Right. Well, this is a multi-billion-dollar fraud program that is still being uncovered. Now, estimates are estimating that it's about $9 billion of tax money that has been looted from you, the American taxpayer, that's been looted from the Treasury. I think that Congress has a role in ensuring that our welfare programs are not abused by left-wing governors like Governor Walz, who is using this to fund what is virtually a patronage system of taking Americans' hard-earned tax dollars and giving it to his political allies by turning a blind eye amidst widespread, rampant welfare fraud that he knew was going on. That's a huge problem. I think that this act is the first step in clamping down on welfare fraud. I think we have a lot more to do, but this is a great first step to begin.
Do you sense, Congressman Gill, that any of your Democratic colleagues in Congress and the House are so outraged that they'll actually join in the investigation or maybe try to give a little bit of credence to this bill? I mean, they've got to feel outraged that billions of dollars meant to go and feed hungry people could have gone to Somalia, certainly went to fraud, waste and abuse, and not to those truly in need.
Well, there's estimates now that this money could have been funneled to al-Shabaab terrorists in Somalia. I hope that Democrats jump on board and recognize what a severe problem this is for the American people. But, welfare for Democrats is a way of taking American tax dollars, giving it to their political allies. It is a patronage system. It is you vote for me and I will take other people's money and give it to you. And I don't care if it's fraudulent. I don't care if you shouldn't be getting it. As long as you vote for me, that's the goal. I hope that Democrats recognize how unbelievably corrupt this is, how it undermines our entire social system, our entire economic system, and gets on board. But, they've been pretty hesitant to do that so far. The Democrat playbook has been import as many unassimilable foreigners as they possibly can, get them on the dole, and ensure that these people vote Democrat for life. That's what we're up against here.
Congressman Gill, since I have you here for the next minute or so, I want to ask you about today's startling economic news. What's the message to the people in your congressional district in Texas with these numbers?
Well, this is President Trump's economic agenda in action here. You see GDP hitting levels that nobody thought was possible this soon. And listen, the benefits, the economic benefits from the working families tax cut that House Republicans and President Trump got over the finish line earlier this summer hasn't even hit yet. So I think this is just the beginning. There is far more to come. There are bigger and better things in store for the American people over the next year. But this is what it looks like to have a president in the White House who is putting the American people first, who is actually supporting the American economy, not foreigners, not foreign governments, but the American people.
Congressman Brandon Gill of Texas, thank you very much. Merry Christmas to you and your family.
Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna joins me now. So great to see you this evening, and Merry Christmas. It is kind of amazing to look at Democrats, whether it's Kilmar Garcia or these Somali scammers in Minnesota. Democrats always pick the worst people to stick up for and the worst people to make their heroes.
Yeah, you're not wrong on that. You know, it'd be very surprising to see some of my Democrat colleagues actually support Americans or veterans. Meanwhile, they are literally putting illegals first. And that's largely why President Trump won in the midterms. But if I could just say for a second, Charlie, you know, after seeing everything that I've seen in the last couple of months, especially coming out of, Tim Walz's just entire policy, I'm very, very glad that he's not the vice president. JD is much better than he could have ever been.
No, it's really remarkable, but it's also important to remember that, you know, he's been governor there, and so many of the people that have been caught up in this scam have been political donors to him and to Ilhan Omar, and it does make you kind of stop and wonder. And of course, we're talking about tax dollars that all of us across the country have paid to the federal government that got funneled through Washington, D.C. into the coffers of these donors, apparently powerful donors, who are managing to get Tim Walz and Ilhan Omar to do what they want to do what they want in terms of getting money back to them, and that's how they've managed to steal the money.
Well, you know, there definitely needs to be criminal investigations looking into this, especially, I think, at the federal level. But, you know, here's also another angle in that we know that this is a huge problem. It was interesting because I know just in the last, I guess, week or so, Walz managed to actually set up a fraud investigative committee, but he's about 7 years too late. I think ultimately what needs to happen is, you know, these members of Congress apply for earmarks, specifically on legislation. And I think that needs to freeze. I obviously think that the DOJ needs to get involved, but it's really disheartening because you actually do see, I can tell you, people across the country are saying, you know, they might not be getting their benefits, whatever it might be. You have veterans that are homeless right now, and whenever that fraud takes place, you're literally taking away from the people that need it the most, the people that have served our country and Americans that have paid into the system.
Yeah, and it's a complete scam on not only the rest of us, but also so many of their own voters who got lied to. But we very much appreciate I know that you are keeping a close eye on that, and we'll help get to the bottom of all of it. And Merry Christmas to you.
God bless. Thank you.
So the Trump administration is getting a $170 billion funding surge for ICE and Border Patrol. That's going to go through 2029. Officials say they plan to hire thousands of new agents and open new detention centers. But 66% of voters say they're concerned about ICE detentions and deportations. That's according to our Fox News polling. For more on this, we're going to bring in former acting ICE Director Jonathan Fahey. Jonathan, always great to see you and talk about this subject with you. I want to talk about that polling, call for number 3 here. So obviously Trump ran on the border, fixing the border. The border's closed now. Barely anybody's crossing. But a majority of Americans apparently disapprove of his handling of immigration. There's obviously been controversy about getting illegal immigrants out of the country and ICE and Border Patrol operations. There's been pushback all over the place. How do you read into that polling there? And should there be alarm bells going off for the Trump administration ahead of the midterms next year?
Well, I think part of the polling is Trump, in many ways, has already solved the problem. As you know, from spending so much time yourself down at the border, there's just nothing going on down there, and people aren't coming over. So a lot of Americans still don't see the overall threat of illegal immigration. And the Democrats, frankly, they've spent so much time disrupting and obstructing ICE in every respect, along, with the help of the media, that I think they have sort of advanced a narrative that's been helpful to them. But ultimately, I think this is going to go back Trump's way on the polling and also public safety, because we're going to see, we've already seen the crime numbers where they're going to be this year. We're going to have record decreases in crimes, particularly the most serious crimes. We're also sort of dovetailing on your last story. We're going to have a massive drop in overdose deaths. So people will be able to see that these things are working. Plus, on top of that, wages for Americans are rising. Jobs are going to American workers. So all these things, once they all come together, people will see that President Trump's policies really do benefit Americans. And the Democrats' narrative, they always put illegal aliens ahead of public safety, ahead of American citizens. But I do think they've spent so much, meaning the Democrats have spent so much time on the disruption. But I think when the numbers come in, next year settles in, I think it'll be a lot calmer. People will just be moving out more smoothly, and quality of life in America will get better.
And to your point, Democrats have been resisting ICE operations pretty much at every turn. And Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, no stranger to that. Take a listen to what he said here, essentially saying that ICE raids in Minnesota are potentially white supremacy. Take a listen.
This is what happens when your own federal government wages war against you. This is what happens when they target communities for their own benefit. This is what happens when they scapegoat. And this is what happens when they no longer hide the idea of white supremacy when you hear the Vice President of the United States talk about now white people won't have to apologize for being white. I would not put it past this administration to target midnight mass services amongst folks going to worship, because that's who they are.
Jonathan, what do you think the American public thinks when they hear sound bites like that?
Yeah, Tim Walz always sort of seeks out the new low in rhetoric, and I think it really does show they don't really have an argument, because you hear him and you hear Pritzker and some of these other people talking about how it's harming the communities, but then when you take a step back, you see things like crime is down, things are better in these communities. So it's really hard for them to maintain that argument in any way other than the short term. But it really just, we've seen Tim Walz, I mean, remember, I think it was last May at a commencement speech, no less, he was calling ICE agents Nazis, but again, if you had a serious argument, you'd make it. If you don't, you call people names, and that's what Tim Walz is doing, because there's really no defense of the Democrats' position of basically mass amnesty for all the people Joe Biden brought in here illegally. It's interesting, Donald Trump, they are offering $3,000 for people to leave voluntarily. The Democrats should be praising that effort, because it doesn't include any arrest by ICE, any interaction with ICE, and yet they still don't like that. So we know the real agenda has nothing to do with ICE, nothing to do with ICE agents or white supremacy or anything else. It has everything to do with mass amnesty for all of the illegals that they encouraged and brought in under Biden.
Well, 2026 is certainly setting up to be a heated year on this topic, because as we mentioned off the top, ICE is getting a whole lot of money. They say they're hiring another 10,000 officers. That's going to more than double their rank and file. So there's going to be a lot more operations out there, and probably a lot more ticked off Democrats. Jonathan Fahey, great to see you, and Merry Christmas to you.
Now to this, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is in hot water over fraud in his state. Now one GOP lawmaker is fighting back with the Walz Act. Congresswoman Miller Meeks saying, quote, the Walz Act is named for a reason, to ensure this level of negligence can never be repeated anywhere else in America. This bill puts hard safeguards in place to protect taxpayer dollars, shut the door on scam artists, and bring real accountability back to government programs. The Small Business Administration also taking action. SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler announcing on X in part, today I informed Governor Tim Walz that the SBA is halting $5.5 million in annual funding to Minnesota, pending further review. Pressure is also building at the local level. Minnesota mayors speaking out over concerns state fiscal policies are hurting their residents.
Within the last 3 months, this has really gone downhill. And Brian, if we do the quick math, $9 billion in fraud divided by 5.79 million Minnesotans comes out to roughly be $1,500 a person that each Minnesotan, each hardworking Minnesotan, has had stolen from them from the Walz administration and the policies coming out of St. Paul.
I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm a Minnesotan, and I'm frustrated with how it had happened, as well as the communication that's happened. So really, our mayors are joining together not to point fingers and blame, but we're here to help solve the problem. That's what we do.
Joining me now, New York State Assemblyman Jake Blumenkrantz. Jake, thanks for being here. When you see what's happening in Minnesota and you look at how widespread the fraud was, what is the situation here in New York?
Absolutely, Griff. Thank you for having me on. The situation in New York, let's just say Minnesota would be the tip of the iceberg for what we see here in a large blue state like New York. Fraud has gone on rampant for many decades, and in order to uninstitutionalize it, we need legislation that will fundamentally change the way that we investigate. So we introduced a bill called the Stamp Out Fraud Act here in New York. I've been working hard on making sure we can implement something like this. It's simple. 3 separate ways we can help fix the problem. We institute new technologies and ways we can investigate, mandate investigations. In one agency, I saw 35,000 cases reported. Less than 30 were actually leading to arrests. So we're not seeing the investigations.
35,000, only 30?
Only 30. Less than 30. I think it was about 24 were actually led to arrests. And at the end of the day, we need to see real punishment. So we we increase the penalties to fraud so people don't think that defrauding the American people or the people of New York would lead to a slap on the wrist. It needs to be real jail time.
So when you see the hot water that Governor Walz is in Minnesota, do you think that New York Governor Kathy Hochul could face the same scrutiny?
100% absolutely. I think that governors in blue states that have been neglecting to actually tackle fraud, they're neglecting the conversation about affordability. What the individual is just saying, the AG, this number, it adds up for people, whether it's in health insurance fraud in your premiums, in auto insurance fraud in New York, some of the highest rates in the nation. There's a build-in for fraud. We need to look at investigating fraud all across government and the way that government is neglecting to protect the taxpayers, not just of New York, but everyone in America.
You know, when the mayors in Minnesota, it was 100 of them, wrote a letter to the governor, and you heard that one mayor sort of lay out based on the amount of fraud, $9 billion, and then broke it down per resident. It's about $1,500 per resident in Minnesota that they actually paid for that fraud. Do you have any idea what those numbers might look like in New York?
So on a national level, I've seen some interest groups say that something in the order of $1,000 a year in your insurance premiums is built-in cost for fraud. Imagine what that number looks like in a state like New York with some of the highest rates in the nation. I think when it comes to fraud in the benefit space and Medicare space, there's $100 billion of our budget. In comparison, in Minnesota, their entire budget is only $66 billion. That $100 billion is just for Medicare and programs here in New York. Imagine how much bigger that number is at the size and scale in a place like you.
So when you see Congresswoman Miller Meeks trying to introduce this Walz Act and SB Administrator Kelly Loeffler withholding Minnesota money, do you see that as something that could actually help not only in New York, but on a national level?
Well, I entered politics for one simple reason. We need accountability in government that works for taxpayers. I've been trying to get this fight into the spotlight for a long time. If something like the removal of funds from a state sheds light on this topic and sheds light on investigations, I think we need to start taking this very seriously, and they're great first steps in a long road to make sure the American taxpayers are held to the highest standard possible.
Bottom line, and I'll just ask you lastly, do you think that Governor Hochul here in New York may be aware that some of this exists and has chosen not to act on it?
I think we have to look very carefully as to how she acts now, because people are paying attention, and I want the information out there, I want the accountability out there, and I want her to know that we are on watch.
Assemblyman, thank you for being here. We look forward to covering what happens here in New York, because if this is across the nation, it needs to be addressed, as you say, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.